The David Pakman Show at davidpakman.com.
If there was ever a sign that the Trump-Russia scandal was getting even more serious, it is that Donald Trump is personally lawyering up. Donald Trump has now personally retained a lawyer, Marc Kasowitz, to represent him directly in the various investigations that are going on related to Russian interference and or collusion in the 2016 election. Kasowitz has known Trump for decades, has represented Donald Trump in the past. The White House was asked about this reported hire and had no comment. Who do you call for this, right? I mean, how many attorneys are experienced in defending presidents from allegations of colluding with foreign non-friendly nations to seize the White House? I get that the point of hiring Marc Kasowitz is that he's worked with Trump for a long time. It's not like when you're charged with, I don't know, drinking and driving, and there's attorneys who have handled hundreds and hundreds of drinking and driving cases. This is a very, very niche area. And I think really, Pat, this is more about Trump knows this guy and presumably trusts this guy rather than this guy's an expert in this type of thing.
It's hard to become an expert on this type of thing unless you also worked with Nixon and Clinton, I guess. But I think just the fact that Trump is lawyering up doesn't necessarily mean he's guilty. Even if you're innocent, you'd want a lawyer. It
tells us that the fireworks could only just be beginning. So the important thing is that there is this office of the White House counsel. When things start getting difficult, presidents will go outside to get personal attorneys. Bill Clinton did this. As Pat mentioned, Nixon, Clinton. Clinton was impeached, as you may recall, not removed from office as a result of that impeachment, and he had a personal lawyer. As always with Trump, there is either a double standard or a conflict of interest not far from the story, and that's the case here. As reported by Rachel Maddow last night, Donald Trump's lawyer, I mean, you know where I'm going with this, Pat. Yeah. Donald Trump's lawyer that he is retaining to help him with the Trump-Russia scandal, Marc Kasowitz, is himself connected to Russia. Marc Kasowitz was recently named a lead attorney in a federal civil lawsuit against Sberbank, which is a bank that is majority owned by none other than the Russian government. He hired a lawyer who is connected to Russia to defend him against allegations, potentially criminal allegations of collusion with Russia.
And until a few hours ago, it was reported that a possible replacement for FBI Director James Comey would be Joe Lieberman. And initially, they thought there would be some bipartisan support there because Lieberman was a longtime Democrat, of course, ran with Al Gore in 2000, and that maybe he would get Republican support as well because he supported the Iraq War and he endorsed John McCain in 2008. But if you get this, Joe Lieberman worked at the same law firm as Trump's lawyer. So there would be a clear conflict of interest, and I think that was just a bridge too far.
Can you imagine if you've got Trump being defended against, within the context of the FBI's Trump-Russia investigation, and then you've got a guy from the exact same law firm as his attorney at least somewhat involved in that investigation, along with Special Prosecutor Robert Mueller. Not going to happen. And I think we're back to the drawing board. Trump last week was saying any day now, I'm going to tell you who the new FBI director is going to be. Yeah. And now, reportedly, are they completely back to the drawing board on that?
Well, it's not going to be Texas Senator John Cornyn. It's going to be not going to be Joe Lieberman. So, yeah, they've hit the reset button on that one.
Yeah, yet another. And this is a trend we've seen with Trump, just taking forever to hire people that need to be hired for open positions. And this is at the highest levels, and also, you know, hundreds and thousands of people at lower levels of government. Just a very, very strange thing. Just the logistics of the White House are just as bad as the optics of the White House. Yesterday morning, John Brennan, the CIA director that served under President Obama from 2013 to 2017, testified before the House Intelligence Committee as part of their investigation into Russia and the Trump campaign. Now, before we get into it, does anyone still feel that the House Intel Committee has any credibility at this point in their investigation of Trump-Russia? I certainly don't. So this was powerful testimony, but yes, it was in front of a committee riddled with scandals, like when former committee chair Devin Nunes was running to the White House to tell Donald Trump what the committee had. lunatic ideologues like Trey Gowdy asking bogus questions at committee hearing after hearing. But okay, that's where John Brennan testified. Let's focus on the testimony for now. John Brennan, who is the person that the Trump administration often cites as having said, hey, Brennan said there's no evidence of Trump-Russia collusion. Brennan has since walked back that claim and said he cannot say with certainty whether there is evidence proving or disproving collusion between Donald Trump and Russia. And the key point is that while Brennan is not necessarily, I don't know, on anyone's side, for lack of a better term, he's definitely not defending Trump here the way that the White House has been portraying him to be some great defender of Trump being squeaky clean. Yesterday, former CIA Director John Brennan told the House Intel Committee that during the 2016 election, he was briefed on intelligence that showed, quote, contacts and interactions between the Russian government and members of the Trump campaign. We knew that, right? We knew that there were communications between Russia and members of the Trump campaign. But Brennan yesterday emphasized the interactions multiple times, and I was sort of enlightened to hear how concerned he was about this. Take a listen to what John Brennan had to say.
I encountered and am aware of information and intelligence that revealed contacts and interactions between Russian officials and U.S. persons involved in the Trump campaign that I was concerned about because of known Russian efforts to suborn such individuals. And it raised questions in my mind, again, whether or not the Russians were able to gain the cooperation of those individuals. I don't know whether or not such collusion, that's your term, such collusion existed. I don't know. But I know that there was a sufficient basis of information and intelligence that required further investigation by the Bureau to determine whether or not U.S. persons were actively conspiring, colluding with Russian officials.
So what Brennan is saying here is that he was particularly concerned about the communications between Trump associates and Russian associates because Russia tends to bribe and blackmail people. Now, he is the former CIA director, so he didn't say anything about what has been determined as a result of that by the current ongoing investigations. Republicans immediately tried to frame this as, hey, Brennan went up there and said there's no evidence of collusion. No, what Brennan said is, when he used to be CIA director, here's what he was aware of, and here's why he was concerned about it. He couldn't speak to whether collusion did or didn't take place or has been determined to have taken place. The guy is no longer doing the investigation.
And it seems like whenever these intelligence officials testify to Congress, they're always just confirming news reports from even months ago.
Yeah.
And they never come out with any major blockbusters. So it is surprising that Republicans are trying to preempt that and trying to get them to contradict what the media is saying.
Absolutely. And it didn't work. I mean, John Brennan was, if you watch this, you could tell this guy was not going to be tricked into saying anything. John Brennan also saying at this hearing, quote, frequently, individuals who go along the treasonous path do not even realize they're along that path until it gets to be a bit too late, which is an interesting comment, to say the least. How did Republicans who had their turn with Brennan handle it? They basically tried to downplay the investigation, defend Donald Trump. They didn't really do a very good job of it. It was pretty transparent. I watched about an hour of this yesterday. They kept trying to get Brennan to say, there is no evidence of collusion, but Brennan kept repeating, I was concerned by the contacts, and I can't judge whether there was or wasn't collusion. Brennan didn't feel qualified, and this is what, when you look at right-wing media after something like this, their headline was, Brennan can't say there's collusion. Brennan refuses to say there's collusion. Brennan said he's not in a position. It's like saying if you bring your mail carrier in and you question them and you say, can you confirm that there was collusion? No, I'm just a mail carrier. I can't confirm that. Mail carrier says no collusion. No, what they said is they're not in a position to comment on whether there was collusion. And that is what John Brennan was saying here.
And Brennan saying, I don't know, is just, I don't know. It's nothing further than that. It's not like he's saying, well, I can't really comment on this in a public setting. And you can see why both sides, I guess, would try to twist his words to fit some narrative.
No doubt about it. But there is some objective reality about what he did say. And the general idea of the Republicans is downplay the entire thing like there's nothing to see here. That becomes more and more difficult to do when we know that Donald Trump asked the Director of National Intelligence and the Director of the NSA to publicly lie and say, oh, no evidence, no collusion between Trump and Russia. Trump asked former FBI Director James Comey to stop investigating Michael Flynn, who's was an important part of the investigation, then fired Comey, admitting that part of it was to ease the pressure on him because of the Russia investigation. And now the former director of the CIA is confirming, yeah, there was communication between Trump and Russia. The idea of, oh, this is all just completely overblown. Republicans had an opportunity at this hearing. You could even argue that they had a duty to really question John Brennan in the service of finding out more about whether or not the president colluded with a foreign adversary. That's something that should go beyond politics. But instead, these Republicans waste time with John Brennan playing silly political games, trying to use semantic tricks on John Brennan, trying to make the investigation look frivolous, sweep everything under the rug. Republicans haven't even been responding with that much disapproval after we found out that Trump asked the DNI and director of the NSA to lie to the public and say there's no evidence of collusion. And former CIA Director Brennan also criticized Trump for sort of blurting out this Israeli intel to Russians in the Oval Office. Take a look at this other clip from Brennan's hearing.
Two protocols are, one is that such intelligence, classified intelligence, is not shared with visiting foreign ministers or local ambassadors. It's shared through intelligence channels because it needs to be handled the right way, and it needs to make sure that it is not exposed. He didn't do that, if the press charges are accurate. Secondly, before sharing any classified intelligence with foreign partners, it needs to go back to the originating agency to make sure that the language in it is not, even just providing the substance, going to reveal sources and methods and compromise the future collection capability.
Yeah, so what John Brennan is saying there is your everyday run-of-the-mill spy recruiting Russian ambassador should not casually be told about information that would presumably be handled with extreme care. But that's not what Trump does, because as we know, he wanted to brag to the Russians about the great intel that he gets. Send me your thoughts about John Brennan. Send me your thoughts about Trump lawyering up. I'm on Twitter at @dpacman. The show is on Twitter at David Pakman Show.
The David Pakman Show at davidpakman.com. The David Pakman Show at davidpakman.com.
Today's new member of the day is Craig Hodge. Craig, thank you for being a member of the David Pakman Show. We depend on the support of members like Craig. You can sign up for membership and get all the great member benefits, including the members-only bonus show produced every single day just for our paid subscribers at davidpakman.com/membership. You can also make a pledge in any amount, as little as $1 a month, at patreon.com/David Pakman Show. And of course, if you ever shop on Amazon.com, remember to go to davidpakman.com/Amazon before you shop. And then everything you buy will send us a little kickback. All right, I know people have been waiting anxiously for this week's Hatriot Mail. We're going to get to it in a second. First, a reminder about what Hatriot Mail is.
It's like email forwards from your racist grandma on steroids. Hatriot Mail. Written by patriots who hate David Pakman. Because America. And because freedom.
This week's Hatriot Mail contains two instant favorites of mine, and one relates to the Westboro Baptist Church. Although you won't actually hear the word Westboro in this Hatriot Mail. Let's take a listen to this.
David Pakman is a globalist cuck. MAGA. God, you're a cuck. David Pakman's hand motions are very effeminate. Pakman, just a dishonest person. It's clear the leftists are the violent group in America. Except the KKK and West Marlboro cult, rest of terrorists and violent group in America are funded by the left. Why do you whites and Jews always want to control what we do? What a load of crap, Pakman. I think David Pakman has mental illness. Put him of YouTube.
Yes, immediately put me of YouTube. I don't know what that means, but I'm going to be put of YouTube.
You could be the head of YouTube, perhaps.
That's what they mean. The West Marlboro Baptist Church. That is the church where they say They pray to the god of Marlboro cigarettes or something like that, rather than God hates fags. Actually, it's kind of interesting that fags is cigarettes, right? I mean, it used to mean cigarettes to say fags. Anyway, the West Marlboro Baptist Church, I can tell you with certitude, we've never had anyone from that. We've interviewed people from Westboro Baptist Church, Shirley Phelps Roper and Jonathan Phelps and the other dude that like married in, Steve Drain or whatever, or just joined, but never anybody from the West Marlboro Baptist Church.
And the KKK and the Marlboro Baptist Church are the only two violent extremist groups on the right wing?
Yeah, right. Oh, yeah. That's
Okay.
there's no Patriot movement people. There's no sovereign citizen people or the Bundy type clan or any of those. There's none of that stuff.
Those don't count.
It's just Marlboro and the KKK. Remember, you can turn Hatriot Mail into something positive. The coupon code Hatriot40 saves you 40% on any membership at davidpakman.com/membership. This is unbelievable, what I'm about to show you. Last month, Donald Trump spoke on the phone with the Filipino president, Rodrigo Duterte, and he was widely criticized by members of both parties because he invited Duterte to come to the United States. Duterte is a violent strongman, and we now have a transcript of the call, okay? It has been published in full by The Intercept. We are going to go through some aspects of this call, and it is incredibly disturbing. Let's start with the first part of the transcript here, if we can, Pat. And you'll see that in this, after greeting each other, Donald Trump says that I just want to congratulate you because I'm hearing of the unbelievable job on the drug problem. Many countries have the problem. We have a problem. But and this is kind of hard to see here, what you were doing, and I just wanted to call and tell you that. It's great what you were doing. There's a confidential stamp over this, so it's hard to see it. And the president of the Philippines says, "Thank you, Mr. President. This is the scourge of my nation now, and I have to do something to preserve the Filipino nation." And so at the bottom, then, the president of the United States says, "I understand that and fully understand that. And I think we had a previous president who did not understand that, but I understand that, and we have spoken about this before." Donald Trump is, within 30 seconds of getting on the phone with Rodrigo Duterte, the president of another country, slamming Obama completely unprovoked, right? Saying the previous guy didn't understand the problem of drugs, apparently, of drug usage or drug dealing. It's not even clear what problem Obama didn't understand. But then he praises Duterte for doing a great job on the war on drugs. People in the Philippines are allowed and encouraged to kill suspected drug dealers, suspected drug users in the streets with no repercussions. Okay, so let's continue with the transcript of this phone call between our fearless leader, President Trump, and the president of the Philippines, Rodrigo Duterte. Okay, so they talk about a couple different things, and then they get on to Kim Jong-un, okay? So Trump says, "What's your opinion of him, Rodrigo? Are we dealing with someone who is stable or not stable?" This is a sort of rough transcript. And the president of the Philippines says, "He is not stable, Mr. President," as he keeps smiling when he explodes a rocket. He even has gone against China, which is the last country that he should rebuke. But it seems from his face that he's laughing always, and there is a dangerous toy in his hands which could create so much agony and suffering for all mankind. And this is where it gets really wacky. After they talk a little bit about Kim Jong-un, at the bottom of this page of the transcript, POTUS says, "We have a lot of firepower over there. We have 2 submarines, the best in the world. We have 2 nuclear submarines. Not that we want to use them at all." Trump is, again, bragging about firepower and talking about the strategic location of American Navy assets. He's bragging to another president about what we have. This is like when in the Oval Office, he was bragging to the 2 Russian officials about the great intel that he gets. That's what Trump does when he gets on the phone with a world leader, brags about our nuclear subs.
Well, remember, Trump said that he would learn foreign policy on the job. It turns out to be true because during the campaign, he didn't even know about the nuclear triad.
Yeah.
Now he knows about the submarines.
Now he knows at least that the 2 submarines exist. Okay. And then lastly, from this insane transcript between Trump and Duterte, this is the infamous invitation, okay, where Donald Trump said that you can tell him, let's see, where did he say that? He's a good guy. Oh, he talks about how he liked meeting the president of China. And then I think we have the second part of this where Donald Trump actually invites the president of the Philippines to come to the U.S., saying, we will be happy to see you, Rodrigo, and I look forward to seeing you. If you want to come to the Oval Office, I will love to have you in our Oval Office anytime you want to come. I'll be in the Philippines in November, blah, 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 blah. That's the invitation that we now learned took place. So a few interesting things. Number one, even when on the phone with other presidents, Trump brags about nuclear power. He brags about weaponry. He slams Obama. So Trump's conversations with other world leaders seem to be the same as basically what he says at a campaign rally. There seems to be no difference in terms of decorum or approach for Donald Trump. And also what's endlessly fascinating from this is that Trump refers to the president of the Philippines as Rodrigo. And the president of the Philippines refers to Trump as Mr. President. That might be that Trump just lacks decorum and respect. I don't know what we can read into that. Maybe Duterte is just naturally more submissive in some way. But isn't this fascinating that we got this transcript?
It really is, because it just sounds as if Trump has some sort of man crush on Duterte. I mean, when do we get to meet each other? November? Can we do a little earlier? Your place, my place? I'm all for it.
It's incredible, truly incredible. And I was reading that with endless fascination yesterday. I want to talk to you about a math error to the tune of $2 trillion. A lot of money here. Donald Trump is not exactly a details guy, despite what he says. He throws ideas out there, right? Ideas out there. The details will get figured out by, I guess, someone else. Build the wall in Mexico, will pay for it. Well, how? Who will get them to pay for it? How much will it cost? Don't worry, they're going to do it. We're going to shut down Muslim immigration. Well, with what legal mechanism? How will that work? Is it constitutional? Don't worry, it's all going to get figured out when I'm president. And one of the huge crutches that Trump has used on the economic side is to talk about how all of his proposals will work out despite being obviously ridiculous, despite being obviously deficit exploding, because the economy is going to do so well that there's just going to be tons of extra money to pay for everything. And it turns out that when it comes to Donald Trump's budget, Trump is counting that imaginary expected economic growth, $2 trillion worth of it, 2 times. That's right. Donald Trump has a $2 trillion error in his budget. Trump has made the claim that the budget he proposed over a decade will balance, okay? And that he's going to be able to balance the budget without cutting defense and without cutting retirement spending. How is that possible? Because there's going to be $2 trillion in revenue from future economic growth. Totally unbelievable, totally vague, but okay, it's what Trump claims. The problem is that the hugely deficit exploding nature of Trump's tax cut program, which mostly benefits the rich, is going to also be paid for by the same $2 trillion in revenue from future economic growth. Trump is counting the $2 trillion in future growth that is hard to believe even will exist 2 times. This is not exactly forgetting to round up the restaurant tip to the next dollar. Imagine an equivalent conversation with your significant other. Listen, I know we're stretched thin, but I figured out a way to get a car lease that's an extra $100 a month. I'm going to spend $100 more on my car lease, but I'm going to cut $100 a month from my monthly going out with my friends expenses. Okay, 100 up, 100 down makes sense. And then the next day you go back to your significant other and you say, hey, I'm going to increase the cost of my spending on video games by $100 a month, but I'm going to pay for it by cutting $100 from my monthly going out with my friends expenses. Wait. So you're going to cut $200 from going out to pay for both things? No, I'm going to cut the same $100 both times to cover the increase of $200. Doesn't make sense. And here's how the White House attempted to explain this away, and it is just gold.
So I'm aware of the criticisms, and I would simply come back and say, look, there's other places where we were probably overly conservative in our accounting. We stand by the numbers. We thought that the assumption that the tax reform would be deficit neutral was the most reasonable of the 3 options that we had.
Sure.
We could either assume that our tax reform was deficit neutral, we could assume it would reduce the deficit, we would assume it would add to the deficit. And given the fact that we're this early in the process about dealing with tax reform, we thought that assuming that middle road was the best way to do it. Yes,
Can
sir.
you imagine a more bogus response? It's like multiple conflicting responses. We've been wrong about other things too, so that makes up for the double counting of $2 trillion in revenue that would appear out of thin air that we're early in the process of anyway. And then at the core is that even counting the 2 trillion once is nuts, right? Don't think for a second that if they only count this $2 trillion one time, that then it all makes sense. It was never coherent when they were counting the 2 trillion one time. It's doubly incoherent when you're counting the same $2 trillion twice. And
$2 trillion just sounds like so much money that it's kind of hard to wrap your head around it.
Yeah.
It is very significant. I mean, the entire discretionary budget for 1 year is a little over $1 trillion.
Absolutely.
So this adds up to about 2 years, and that's all of defense spending. That's the Department of Education and Energy,
it's everything. Yeah.
Veterans benefits. It's a lot, yeah.
So there are two options here. It's either an embarrassing mistake or it's deliberate deception, and neither is respectable and neither inspires confidence. Not to mention, by the way, that economists agree that tax cuts for the rich aren't actually good for the economy. We don't have evidence that this standard sort of voodoo trickle-down economic stuff actually works. That's at the base of it. Layer 2 of the pyramid is counting the 2 trillion once doesn't make any sense. And the cherry on top, right, the tip of the pyramid is when you count the imaginary 2 trillion twice, it really, really, really doesn't make sense.
Yeah, and this is obviously going to be a deficit-funded tax cut. And this is coming from the guy in Donald Trump who promised to eliminate the national debt in 8 years. Not the deficit, the debt. $20 trillion.
Hopefully he won't get 8 years to try to do it and obviously fail miserably. A lot of discussions about this on our Reddit discussion forum. Join us there, davidpakman.com/Reddit.
The David Pakman Show at davidpakman.com. Welcome back to the David Pakman Show.
We are joined today by Dr. Blaine Bettinger, who is an intellectual property attorney as well as a genealogist specializing in DNA. Producer Pat and I have both taken DNA tests to try to ascertain our background, our ethnic background. So, Dr. Bettinger, to begin with, when we take a DNA test like this, and we took the ancestry.com DNA test, I also did an additional test from 23andMe. This is a saliva test. How do these tests, generally speaking, work? What can they tell us and what can they not tell us?
So these tests are mainly used for two different things. The first is to give us an idea, a very high-level overview of our what's called our biogeographical ancestry, or what some people call our ethnicity ancestry. So, for example, a continental level, where what percentage of our DNA is European, African, Asian, Native American, and so on. The second thing we can learn from this is we can find our genetic matches in the database, other people who are our genetic relatives that have also taken these types of tests.
And when you're talking about genetic relatives, as well, without giving away any of the results yet, genetic similarities do not necessarily correlate directly with sort of a family tree match. Is that sort of accurate, or how can we think about that?
Well, actually, I would say it in the reverse. Having a genealogical match does not mean you're going to genetically match them, especially for more distant relatives. But if you have, say, a second cousin or closer that's already tested, you will match their DNA, and you'll be able to get a rough estimate of what your relationship is just based on the amount of DNA you share with them.
All right, very good. So let's start digging into the results. Let's start with David Pakman Show producer Patrick Ford. Pat, give us your sense of, as far as you knew, based on the stories that your family sort of had, what did you believe before taking this test was your background in terms of what these DNA tests can tell us?
So from my understanding of my genetic background, most of my ancestors came to America around the turn of the 20th century. And on my paternal side, it's mostly from the British Isles. That's what I've been told. So, of course, England, Scotland, Wales, and Ireland. And then my maternal side is split. My expectation was evenly between Lebanese and Eastern European / Polish.
Okay, so Dr. Bettinger, that's Pat's understanding of his family background. Let's now dig into Pat's actual DNA results. What can we glean from them?
Well, first we look at, I generally start off by looking at someone's ethnicity analysis. So for example, Pat's ethnicity analysis revealed a percentage of 80% European, and there was around 20% West Asian or Middle Eastern. And so that doesn't quite break down to the 50-50 that you might expect if the based on solely on what we just heard from Pat, but it's close. We have this sort of um, Great Britain, Ireland, Eastern European breakdown of European, and then we also have this Middle Eastern, West Asian percentage as well.
Now, Pat, when you saw, because when we're looking at the results here, when you saw the Europe East part, that does not really correlate with what your understanding was of your background, right? I mean, we're seeing Great Britain and we're seeing Ireland as far as the European part, but Europe East, did you know anything about that?
I did, because my maternal grandfather I knew either came from Poland or Russia, and of course the border went back and forth over the years from there. But what it was a surprise was Italian/Greek. I had no understanding that I had any of that, and I think it says, what, about 8 or 9% come from that area?
Okay, so Dr.
Yes.
Bettinger, this gets to sort of my next question, which is when we got these results, there are what are called high confidence and low confidence results. And we'll see in mine that I have some very low confidence results. What does that really mean? Does that mean that there may be some sort of coincidental DNA overlap, but it may not necessarily represent an area of someone's background? Or how valuable is that to us?
That's a really good question, and that's probably one of the most common concerns and questions about these ethnicity estimates, and that is that they're not a perfect science. It's very, very rough science, because what happens is you get your DNA and it's compared to these reference populations that are obtained from these different places. There are groups of individuals that have been tested from Great Britain, Eastern Europe, Ireland, Italy, Greece, and your DNA is compared to these individuals. But if you think about it, there are very few populations today that have been in this region and isolated in any one region for thousands of years or even hundreds of years. There's been lots of intermixing, especially, for example, all along the Mediterranean. There's been plenty of mixing of populations there. From Ireland to Great Britain, lots of mixing there, all across Central Europe. And so what happens is it's hard to say that if you get say a 20% Ireland, for example, that's perfectly 20% Ireland. And in fact, each of these percentages have ranges, because this analysis is run multiple times by this company. So if you click on any of your percentages, you'll actually see a range that was along those different, that was for each of those ethnicity predictions. So for Ireland, the range may be 10% to 30%, and the average was 18%, for example.
Sure. All right, let's now get to my results. My understanding of my family background was quite boring in a sense. I mean, as far as I knew, I am of Ashkenazi Jewish origin. I'm not aware of any blood relatives that were anything but 100% Ashkenazi Jewish. What would not have surprised me from my results would have been if there was some Asian DNA, because in the part of Europe, Eastern Europe, where I believe my family to be from, it was not that rare to have some mixing with Asian countries. But beyond that, certainly what would have been a big surprise to me would have been, you know, a significant African origin or something like Indian, for example. So, Dr. Bettinger, let's put my results up on the screen and we can start getting into those. What are the key points of my results?
So really the first thing that jumps out at you is that 92% European Jewish ancestry. And I think that lines up very, very well with exactly what you were expecting to see.
Yeah.
Beyond
go ahead,
that,
yeah.
if you click on your low confidence regions, for example, you do see there are some very small percentages of other places, like 2% Italy, Greece, for example, 2% Finland, and a few smaller percentages. So those may be instances of either there might be some noise there, or there could be that there have been there's been these populations that have been introduced into your Jewish ancestry at some point in time.
Would it be accurate to say that based on the results that we have here that we're looking at, that the only result that I received with any degree of confidence is an Ashkenazi Jewish background? Is that fair?
I think that's fair to say, yes.
Wow.
The confidence in that is extremely, extremely high, but the others, I would say, I wonder whether or not they're noise. And so generally what I do is I only look at the continental level. I like to look at how much European, how much African, how much Native American, how much Asian, and that's where I get the most confidence. Below that, once it starts breaking down into regions, that's where the science gets a little bit more challenging.
So overall, I have a 99% European test and 1% Africa. But when you look at that 1% in Africa, again, it's a 1% low confidence result from North Africa. Is that potentially completely meaningless here?
It is potentially meaningless, but what I know about that is the fact that it is a North African estimate. And so if you click on that, you actually see it's Africa North, which could be that upper coast of the of Africa along the Mediterranean there. And so again, there was a lot for thousands of years. There's been a lot of travel across the Mediterranean, both back and forth across there. And so it's possible that at some point in time, there was this African introduction of DNA.
In your expert opinion, as someone who's looked at a lot of these results, am I the most Jewish person whose results you've looked at? I mean, it seems as though it's possibly just a little bit of noise and then an Ashkenazi Jewish background as I look at it.
Yeah, I have to say it's one of the most Jewish backgrounds, Jewish estimates I've ever seen. So yes, absolutely.
Wow. So, I mean, I guess what we can gather from this is the story that I was sort of told growing up and based on the family tree that I've put together, it does appear to be more or less accurate. There were really no surprises whatsoever here. But this doesn't rule out the possibility that one of these other minor regions at some point saw some intermarriage.
Yes, I think that's a perfect assessment. Yes.
Wow. Well, I wish my results were sort of more interesting. I mean, I guess it's interesting to confirm. In your experience, how common is it that there are no surprises? In other words, we heard about the white supremacist who ended up being 14% African, for example. That video went viral a couple of years ago. That was a big surprise. But by and large, are surprises pretty rare on these tests?
You know, I've found in my experience that a large percentage of people do have surprises in their results, primarily because if you think about it, very few of us can build back a family tree back a number of generations that doesn't have holes. And so you never know what that hole, that brick wall in your tree might represent. And so I think people do find ethnicity estimates or matches or other things in their results that tend to be surprising. And of course, there's a very large number of people that find extremely big surprises. Things like my parent was not my parent, or I'm adopted, or they find a biological family, for example. So those are happening with greater and greater frequency. Not a huge percentage, but still it's happening more and more.
Okay, a couple other quick things before we let you go. On my test, one of the things Ancestry.com will tell you is the number and even give you specific information about other DNA matches. Now, when it comes to people of an Ashkenazi Jewish background, you said that those DNA matches can sort of, they need to be interpreted maybe a little differently. Can you talk about that a bit?
Absolutely. If there's a large percentage of Jewish ancestry, then what happens is your matches appear to be closer than they are in many cases because there's something called endogamy. Now, endogamy, all it means is that there is a higher amount of shared DNA as a result of intermarriage within a population for a large amount of time. So, for example, in Jewish culture, it's common for this intermarriage to occur. And so, as a result, we have this increased amount of DNA that's shared between individuals from within that population. So, for example, if you have a predicted third cousin, for example, then that third cousin might actually be more distant genealogically. Genetically, they share more DNA because you come from this shared background.
Very good. And then the last thing I want to touch on, and we actually can put this up on the screen. I also did a 23andMe DNA test. Part of this was I was sort of curious whether this entire thing is a scam. If my results would have been drastically different between Ancestry and 23andMe, there would have been some questions to answer. Fortunately, the results from 23andMe were very similar. But on this last image, which we have that we can put up, my Neanderthal variants, Neanderthal DNA, which according to the 23andMe test, I have fewer Neanderthal variants than 59% of 23andMe test takers or customers. Can you talk a little bit about what that means?
Right. So we're just beginning to understand Neanderthal DNA. And it appears, based on some recent studies, some very good studies that were done, it appears that humans and Neanderthals, modern humans and Neanderthals, interbred. And so as a result, most non-Africans throughout the world have a certain amount of Neanderthal DNA, it appears, a low amount, somewhere between 1 and 5% or so. And it appears that intermixing occurred in Europe, and so that's why, for example, Africans don't seem to have that large percentage of Neanderthal DNA. What's interesting is they've identified some variants, some DNA variants that appear to be to have come from Neanderthal ancestry or Neanderthal DNA. And so what 23andMe does is they will look for those variants in your DNA and they'll report them to you if you have a high percentage. And you're lucky. I think my percentage is actually much, much higher. So you're less Neanderthal than I am.
Now, you said lucky. Are there any objectively positive or negative sort of connotations to having more or less Neanderthal DNA?
Not that we're aware of. However, the fact that there's this consistent low-level amount of Neanderthal DNA in our genomes suggests that it was beneficial to us in some way, that we maintained that low level because it provided us with some advantage. And that science is still out there. I've seen a couple of papers that have talked about that, and I expect there to be a lot of interesting developments in that area in the future.
And for people who are interested in reading more about that, in Yuval Harari's, not his most recent book, Homo Deus, but the previous one, Sapiens, he actually writes somewhat extensively about what we're now learning about intermixing between Neanderthal and Homo sapiens. Dr. Blaine Bettinger, absolutely fascinating. I can't thank you enough for coming on and talking to us about this today. Pat, any other questions you have for the doctor?
So I noticed 3% from the Caucasus Mountains and 1% Indian in my results. That certainly threw me as a surprise. I didn't have any expectations of that. In your experience, do you think that makes sense? Do you think that jives with my results?
Caucasus definitely does, because that's in the right region. However, the Iberian Peninsula, for example, those are all pretty low levels. Anything I generally say around 1% or less, I generally will be concerned that it's just noise. Above that, it appears to be a generally pretty accurate estimate as far as, you know, the general caveats about ethnicity estimates go.
All right. Dr. Bettinger, thanks again for being on. Really, really appreciate it.
Thank you very much.
The David Pakman Show at davidpakman.com. The David Pakman Show at davidpakman.com.
All right, settle in because I'm about to show you some cringe-worthy video clips. This week, Donald Trump, as you might know, visited a number of countries in the Middle East, visiting countries in Europe, landed in Brussels, Belgium today. Monday and Tuesday, Trump was in Jerusalem, in Israel, meeting with President Reuven Rivlin and Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu. A number of highlights, and I want to lead up to Donald Trump totally and completely humiliating himself once again. But let's start slow. I don't want to throw everything at you at once. So Trump arrives in Israel after leaving Saudi Arabia, and he says, "We just got back from the Middle East." Of course, Israel is in the Middle East, so not exactly starting off that visit to Israel in a strong way. Then we'll get to the video clips for our TV audience. Donald and Melania Trump were walking with Benjamin Netanyahu and his wife, who were holding hands. Donald Trump tried to hold Melania's hand, and she sort of slaps his hand away in a very, very odd way. And then Trump, he was kind of smooth. "Oh, yeah, I was just trying to adjust my tie, not hold my wife's hand." She then again refused to hold Donald Trump's hand last night when they arrived in Rome and we're getting off Air Force One, and you see Donald Trump trying to hold her hand and Melania pulling her hand away and moving some hairs out of her eyes. And then Donald Trump instead patting her on the buttocks. So potentially trouble in paradise. Is Melania Trump being held hostage? We had that viral video that got 4 or 5 million views, Pat, where we caught Melania looking very, very concerned during the inauguration and not pleased with Donald Trump. So a number of these lightly cringeworthy moments during the trip to Israel. You with me so far?
Yeah, well, it's no wonder why Melania is staying in New York City instead of at the White House with Trump. I think she found out about all these sexual assault allegations and the troubles in Donald Trump's past at the same time as we did.
Well, she says she's forgiven Donald and that we should as well. And I believe her, or something. Yeah, maybe not. So let's get back to Trump's trip to Israel, okay? Then, at another point during his trip in Israel, Donald Trump defends himself against an allegation about Russia that nobody ever made. He appeared alongside the Israeli Prime Minister, Benjamin Netanyahu, and the press started asking Trump about when he haphazardly gave intel to Russian diplomats in the Oval Office, intelligence that we now believe came from Israel. And Donald Trump basically denied something that no one ever argued. Take a listen to this.
Just so you understand. Give up. Just so you understand, I never mentioned the word or the name Israel. Never mentioned it during that conversation. They were all saying I did. So you had another story wrong. Never mentioned the word Israel.
So no one actually ever accused Trump of saying, hey, Sergey, I got this info from Israel. Nobody said that. Trump told Sergey what they had learned, never mentioned it was from Israel, may not even have known it was from Israel. So again, Pat, Trump is denying something no one ever accused him of.
There was some speculation in the media that the information did come from Israel, but no one in the original sources ever reported that Trump told the Russians that the source was Israel.
Absolutely. And Benjamin Netanyahu looking perplexed and confused and sort of amused as Trump is doing this. So then here is the crowning achievement of cringe during this trip so far. Trump visits Yad Vashem on Mount Herzl in Jerusalem. This is Israel's official Holocaust memorial. There's a museum, the Hall of Names, which remembers victims of the Holocaust. This is a very, very somber place, okay? And by the way, I wonder what Trump's alt-right fans think about their dear leader giving a Holocaust memorial speech at Yad Vashem, okay? Who knows what they think about that? Typically, when heads of state visit the site, they're asked to leave a message in the guest book there, okay? And this is where things start to get vile and humiliating. The memorial is a somber and solemn place. I've been here. Somber and solemn is an understatement. Barack Obama, for example, left a pretty lengthy, heartfelt, and well-written note in the guest book when he visited in 2008, where he says he's grateful to Yad Vashem and all of the people, all of those responsible for it being there as an institution. He talks about a time of great peril and strife, and it's a very well-written, full-page letter, typical Barack Obama fashion, right?
Back when we had an intelligent and articulate president?
Right, exactly. And he talks about let our children come here and know the history so they can add their voices to proclaim never again and remember those who perished. Very, very nice letter that President Obama left there. George W. Bush, okay, not exactly a verbose guy, but he left a short and solemn message when he visited Yad Vashem. God bless Israel, George W. Bush. In comes Donald Trump and instead wrote in all caps printed letters in what looks like the writing of a little kid. And I'm going to put this note up for you. It is a great honor to be here with all of my friends. So amazing and will never forget. Donald Trump. Sounds like he had a grand old time. I mean, totally tone deaf as usual. It's what a second grader would write if they were to visit Yad Vashem, and not a second grader at the top or middle of their class. This would be like what the second grader who was out on the day that they explained what Yad Vashem was would write something like this. I had fun here with all my friends, in all caps.
It reminds me of when Justin Bieber went to the Anne Frank Museum.
Yeah.
And he left a note in the guest book that said, Anne Frank would have been a great girl. She would have been a believer.
Right.
And that was Justin Bieber saying that, and he got a lot of flack for it. This is the president saying this.
It's the president of the United States humiliating himself like he's a child and referring only to himself and his friends rather than to Jews, Israel, or the Holocaust. just embarrassment after embarrassment. We've got a voicemail number. That number is 219-2-DAVID-P. Take a listen to this voicemail that came in.
Hey, David, I'm just looking at this terrorist attack that occurred at the Ariana Grande concert. I'm kind of curious, where are all of the crazy right-wing false flag morons to start yelling and screaming about how Donald Trump somehow orchestrated this attack to take, so that they can take basically everyone's eyes off the investigation with Russia.
Right.
Like they would do with Obama. Everything was a false flag. Sandy Hook, everything was a false flag to try to get your guns. So where are the conspiracy theorists and the Alex Jones nut jobs? Anyway.
Yeah.
Later.
Well said. I don't have much to add. All of a sudden, nobody thinks that there's a false flag, even those same conspiratorial minds. Now, to be clear, I don't believe that the attack in Manchester, England was a false flag. But how could it be that you have droves of right-wingers with Sandy Hook? It's a pretext by Obama to take away guns, which never happened. Record gun sales. Gun sales are down now. They're down from under President Obama. And in the midst of scandal after scandal, nobody suggests maybe there was a false flag here.
Well, now I think that because Alex Jones's InfoWars is getting White House press credentials, they kind of have to tone it down a bit and not criticize the president.
We're going to talk about that tomorrow. Just ran out of time today. We've got a great bonus show for you today. davidpakman.com/membership. Sign up. Coupon code IVoted17 saves you 40% off of the cost of membership.
The David Pakman Show at davidpakman.com.